At this time, I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Palo Alto City Council Finance Committee for Tuesday, October 15th, 2024. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Lowing.
Present.
Councilmember Vinker.
Present.
Chair Bird.
Here.
All present.
Okay. So at this time, we have an opportunity for members of the public to speak on items that are not on the agenda, but are within the purview of this committee. And do we have any speakers under open comment?
We do not.
Okay. We'll go on to our two action items, the first of which is just a discussion by the Finance Committee for the recruitment process and criteria for the Director of the Utilities Department. And this is not a project, but a discussion item for us. And Sandra, are you going to kick this off?
Yes. Yes, thank you. It's my pleasure. Good afternoon, Chair Burt and council members. We're here to discuss the upcoming recruitment for our next utilities director. Given that our esteemed, my esteemed colleague, Dean Batchelor, has announced his retirement. So we're here today to seek your input and to discuss your candidate qualities that you would be interested in sharing with us. I'd like to introduce the recruiter who will be working on this assignment, Terry Black with Terry Black and Company. She also, if you remember to last year, worked on the Chief Financial Officer recruitment. And so similar to last year, she'll be leading the conversation with you today. And I'm here to answer any questions you might have.
Great. And is Terry with us remotely?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, Terry is with us remotely.
I'll just start by saying, Terry, we want as good of a job on this one as you did on the last one.
Well, it's nice to see Lauren in the room. Yes, well, it's a true partnership, and we will do our best to achieve stellar results again. And she had big shoes to fill, right? Right. So it's our honor to represent the city once again in another important executive recruitment. And to make the best use of your time, we'd love, just as we did with the CFO search, love to get your thoughts and insights on those qualities and characteristics that would make for an outstanding new director, given now we have Dean's big shoes to fill. And also, if you have thoughts about priorities, like what you believe the new director should be focused on, say the first 6 to 12 months of their tenure. So kind of two buckets of information that we're striving to fill today.
Great, thank you. And before we get into our discussion, do we have members of the public who want to speak on this item?
Yes, we have one member of the public, Herb B.
Okay, welcome.
And he's in person. One moment. Let me just get us all ready.
Hi, Chair Burton, committee members. I'm surprised that this is on your agenda when it's the council that appoints an officer. Yes, it's appropriate to come to the CIO committee and discuss what the recruitment process should be. But we have a municipal code that says what the functions are of the utilities director. You received in your packet a copy of the current job description. However, it's not exactly the one that's online. It's in a different format, and I haven't had an opportunity to compare it word for word. But this one that's online is dated July 1st, 2011. And it begins with who he reports to and who he supervises. And there's been changes since then that there are more assistant directors, there's one for fiber, and there's now a chief operating officer. So it's unclear, since it's the city manager's responsibility to make a nomination, to choose someone who you then have an opportunity to approve or not. I also noticed that there is now a chief operating officer, and it seems to be the person may have been brought in for succession planning as if the person has already been chosen. I recall council had previously approved the city manager's proposal that Terry Black and Associate do all the recruitments for management and professional employees. And so I went on our site to look for the chief operating officer on the prior recruitments. I couldn't find it there. And in the job description there, it doesn't say who he reports to and who supervises, if anyone. And I suspect that he may have come aboard at this time when it's time to make a change because the current director is leaving with the expectation that based upon his performance, he would be the new director and that if someone else is chosen, that he would leave. And so the question is whether the person's already been chosen and we're just going through a process of taking up people's time when the decision's already been made. Thank you.
That concludes public comment for this item.
Thank you. Colleagues who would like to weigh in with questions or comments?
I guess I could start. So first of all, it will be a bittersweet farewell to Director Batchelor after all of his tenure. We'll miss him. But happy for him that he can have this retirement time. In my view, the succession is not set, although it's always nice to have folks who know our operations from the inside to as benchmarks. So a lot of the job description that is in the city's municipal code talks about setting rates, which of course is of great financial interest to the city, forecasts, which are of great financial interest to the city, and costs, assessing costs, which are of great financial interest to the city. So I think it's appropriate for us to chime in amongst others on this. So going forward, thinking about this position, it requires a very broad skill set, the things I have mentioned, plus the operations that were referenced, and not just for gas and electric, but as we all know, water, wastewater, stormwater, fiber. It's quite a broad operations skill set as well. But I guess what I would like to add to that is that as we also fit that with our climate goals, as was mentioned in the staff report, I think we're thinking about someone who can manage up, down, and laterally. It's a big job, responding to the city council and our residents, responding, making sure you manage this vast utility. And when I say laterally, I'm thinking that, we are looking at distribution of utilities and certainly power and not generation so much. So it's something where you need someone who can manage laterally because there are tremendous number of organizations, whether it's the Northern California Power Agency or the statewide counterpart to that, whether it's even the County Recycling Commission, whether, there are just so very many entities that are advocating policies that affect our provision of utilities services from a financial and operations vantage point. So trying to triangulate that and knowing what others are advocating and trying to put together how we advocate for that is something that I know Director Batchelor has been doing and that we'll need to do going forward. And so I think making sure someone who appreciates the interrelationship with our partners, both within and without the city, and can manage that as well as managing the complex operations within our city is something we ought to be looking for. So those are my initial thoughts.
Ed?
Yeah, thank you. I think the city manager is going to ask for input from a lot of sources, including this committee, but certainly not exclusively this committee. Some will be one-on-ones with council members, some will be other committees. So this is not a single string of input from three council members. Just wanted to kind of put that on the record. I think to begin with, my thoughts. No, I'll look back up at you. You're not on my screen, but my thoughts are that you can't shoot too high. I mean, this has to be, take the time that you need to find the exact right person. So there's not a tough schedule here. Dean's agreed to be available now and even when he leaves, which is not unexpected for a gentleman like he is. And we do have a chief operating officer in there, which was a long time position that gives us even more time and more coverage as we conduct this search. So stating a couple obvious things, electrification is a huge deal, but it's all the utilities. But the focus on what we need to get done on electrification for our climate goals, but just for the betterment of our citizens, has to be a top priority. And the other obvious one is that this has to be a long-term thinker, because what's going to go on in the utilities department for this city is 10 and 20 years. So we want that person thinking out there, not just how do we get the next 3 years executed and figure out the rest later. I think someone who is really up to speed on the new technologies that are out there that can be deployed. Again, in all the utilities, as Vicky underscored, this is a broad, big job, and we want people to know, what's out there, and just also even around the corner, not just the basics like, do we dig or do we put lines on poles? And then I want to speak just to make a point of course, we want somebody that's cost conscious, but we don't want them to be an accountant. We want them to solve for the strategic and tell us what the costs are and the alternative, and then we'll make the call on that. I really appreciate something that wasn't on my list, which Vicky emphasized in terms of being able to manage in all directions. I had on my list, this person has to be a great manager of the staff and a great recruiter of the staff, which we actually have in place right now. We don't want to lose that. But this managing in all directions is a really good point to add to my notes, because it does take that kind of skills. Probably you'll end up with somebody that's sort of known in the industry. And I don't think that's an absolute, but I think it's highly likely and highly preferable. So that's my initial comments.
Thank you. So just following up on comments of my colleagues, one of the things that we are in the midst of is really a very critical transformation of our utilities. We are full service utility, but what we have over the next decade is a ramping up of electrification and a decline in use of natural gas, which is an historic juncture for us and for many other utilities that are going through early stages of a similar process. We're somewhat further along that transformation curve than others, and that puts us at a commendable forefront, but it means we don't have folks that we can readily follow in that path. And the utilities that are furthest along there are figuring things out for themselves and sharing information really through collaborations of emerging best practices. I think this is a really critical aspect that is nearly co-equal with the day-to-day operations of the utilities, which are certainly have always been and continue to be a foremost function, is reliable, cost-effective, safe utilities that we provide our residents and our businesses. So I'm really interested in how we frame this position, not only as an even more expansive role, with this being at the forefront, this whole next transition, but framing it as a really leading opportunity, that there are only a few places in the country where someone could come in and be able to have a transformative impact that's at the forefront of what utilities are doing, and one that I think in this era would, for a certain subset of candidates, be viewed as an opportunity that they would truly aspire to as maybe the most meaningful thing that they'd ever do in their careers. And we've been going through that transformation. I remember, Dean, what was it? 2.5 years ago, we had a little retreat on our electrification. And I was struck by how you had just become really committed to our climate plan and the central role of the utilities in that. And we talked about, what a great utilities director would like to see on the tombstone, and the choice of being having it be, I ran a really good utility and kept the lights on, or I did that and I helped change the world for the better. And I think that that's something that you have moved toward, and I really appreciate all the transformation that's happened in just the last few years. And I think that that can be a really essential attraction for a top quality candidate who otherwise might not be interested in a utility of this size, this community, this housing cost, all those things. And so we can either frame it in terms of, gee, it's got all these challenges and demands, and we got a high expectation community, and all the downsides to the job, which are real, or we frame it more toward what a leading transformative opportunity this position is. And so my advocacy would be that we really include the latter without in any way neglecting the great demands of what has always been in that position. And recognizing that we're not going to have a perfect candidate. Nobody's going to be able to meet all these expectations. We're going to look for the best candidate that we can find, and hopefully really have that sort of top level interest as a result of what we are and are becoming. And I just want to make sure that as part of that, some of the things that are in our strategic studies that are just coming out this fall and winter, including our reliability and resiliency strategic plan. And one of the transformations that we have, that we're already in the midst of, is not just having a reliable electric utility, which we always historically had, but an exceptionally reliable one, as we're looking for the community to transition from use of gas to even greater reliance on electricity. And we're already doing measures to accomplish that. Our capacity upgrade in the grid system has a dual benefit of increasing our reliability, and we have other reliability measures. We, as Vicki said, we are not, for the most part, local generation, but our supply, both having a supply system that we now have set a goal toward moving toward 24/7 green carbon-free electricity versus annually carbon-free. That's a whole new set of challenges. Additional capacity, which actually creates some opportunities for lower cost of that direct supply. We may have higher costs in other areas, but the actual costs of renewables is, for the most part, going down. And so that's another opportunity. So we have to increase supply, and then actually greater local generation and storage, which we're looking at. We're not going to be predominantly locally generating, but we are on the cusp of a new movement in that direction. So those are really consequential and, in my mind, exciting elements to what the new director would be leading on. And let me just see if I had any other points. Well, one, I just noticed that we had essential duties that had staff liaison with the UAC, and really whether it's the director on all the meetings or assistant director or some different combination, I think it goes more beyond liaison. It is really a strong and increasing collaboration between the utilities department and the leadership of that, and the Utilities Advisory Commission, and our Climate Action Ad Hoc Committee. And because the active relationship of the most senior leadership in Utilities Department over the last couple of years has become much more engaged, certainly with the Climate Action Committee, and I think even more so with the Utilities Commission, which is now populated by even more than in the past, probably, but we've always had a lot of this, some really exceptionally diverse capabilities and professional expertise that in some ways is valuable backgrounds that we can't possibly hire full-time positions in our own utilities for a utility our size, and to really think about how we leverage resources, including not just our Utilities Commission, but the world-leading resources that we have at Stanford in the Door School and at SLAC. And we're doing some collaborations there, but there's a real interest there for them to apply their cutting-edge research and development into living labs. And they're thinking of their own campus as a quasi-municipality as one living lab, but we're a second one. And we're not going to be lab rats for everything that they're working on, but certain select things that are really appropriate for a municipal utility that then could be scaled beyond a small municipal utility, which is why they're in business. They want to see the work they're done have practical applications. And so I think that we have even greater opportunities than we have historically to leverage our own resources, which are by definition quite limited. You know, we're the only city in the state that owns all of its own utilities, and we're only a city of less than 70,000 people. It's pretty remarkable. So that's a bunch of my thoughts. And Dean, if I might tap into your insights of what you've seen as the transformations over your tenure, over the last couple of years, and what you see on the horizon, and how that would inform what we should be looking for in your successor.
So good afternoon, Chair Berg. Thank you for the question, council members. Dean Batchelor, Director of Utilities. You know, Council Member Berg, I think that we've had many conversations between us, and I think that the successor needs to be open in a matter of understanding what the possibilities could be, and that it's not just the simple, we're going to increase capacity we're going to put up new wires, new transformers, so and so. But it's someone that has to look at the future portion of it. What does that truly mean? Where do we put microgrids? Where's the most important pieces? One of the conversations I just recently had with a couple of folks, and also with Kylie, is there's a strong possibility that if there's a done deal that happens with Coverly, we should make that our number one goal, because that's where the folks are going to go to in case of some type of emergency, or even if it's just cooling centers or heating centers or whatever we're going to need that piece of property for. But that's the kind of things that we need to take a look at. I've also brought up and talked about it from the council standpoint that, we need to look at batteries. We need to figure ways of looking at capturing space in our substation portions of it so that we're able to bring battery and also and it doesn't really have to be with solar because we're never going to find enough property lines, but when power's up, we recharge our batteries. When that power's down, it'll be able to power in areas. And it's not one side of the city, it's the entire city that we need to take a look at. So I think the future portion of it is someone that strategizes and someone that thinks about where does this utility go and how does it support the customers in the city of Palo Alto? That's got to be the key. I think also as Councilmember Vinker said, and also Vice Mayor
Dean, we're losing your voice a little
said
bit.
is that,
Oh.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
You were starting to fade on your volume a little bit.
Oh, so I also think that it has to be someone that's going to be able to manage throughout the organization. There's 250 plus employees in this organization. It's a large and I'm not sure if we're going to find somebody that's going to have that kind of base knowledge that's going to have a large or a large supervisional standpoint, but is it something that someone has some knowledge base on? Continue on, how do we go about bringing people in and onboarding folks into these important positions, because as we look forward to the future portion of it, we need to make sure that we have the right type of staff. Staff's going to be important as we roll in this. And I think the thing is that this is someone that has to get out there and actually talk to the staff to get them excited about where we're going. What are we doing for the residents? How are we going to plan for the future? We've already kind of planned to some time ago, some years ago, that we're going to be electrifying the city. Okay, well, that's fine. But now what's the next steps that we're going to be able to take? And so I think that as my successor comes on, he or she are going to have to be looking at what the potential is going to be for the future and how do we take what we have today and move it forward. And I think the thing is that Director Lau and I have talked about that we need to be a little bit better of a partnership with Stanford, because I think that Stanford is the place where the answer could be as they break down into these different types of labs, and all the resources that they will have will be able then to turn our path in the right direction. So I think it's someone that has to be able to collaborate, not just from within, but also being able to collaborate with Stanford as well as some of the other agencies. So those are some of my thoughts.
Thanks, Dean. That was really helpful. You prompted kind of one follow-up question, which is kind of given that we're not going to find anyone who has all of those capabilities is a superstar operations, a superstar visionary, a superstar across all those different types of utilities all at once. And therefore, what you alluded to in terms of the senior staff and the various assistant directors who would be exceptionally strong in each of those major category areas. I just would welcome any other insights you have on what we should be preparing for, and do we need to be thinking about even greater strengthening there if we're going to be looking for the director to have an even broader scope than historically? How do we achieve that without unrealistically expecting too much from one person.
Well, I think that, knowing the staff that I know today, staff is going to turn. There's no doubt. There's an assistant director on the electric operations and engineering side. And we've actually been stepping out and talking to a few folks through NCPA to look at how we're going to make the session plan work, which is going to happen possibly this year, as soon as this year, maybe into next year. Because I think the thing is that if as we talked about, we're not going to find somebody that's going to have 5 utilities underneath them. But the thing is that I think the most important piece to concentrate on is definitely on the electric side. That's where the future is going to lie. I think the thing is that we are strong with our gas and wastewater from our AD. I have the utmost confidence that we've also started planning on what we're going to do with the decommissioning of the gas system. So I'm not so worried on that side. I'm more worried on the electric side as we move forward. And like I said, we are also trying to potentially fill a hole that could happen as early as the end of this year on the electric side. And that is definitely going to play key to the engineering and to the operational side. But I can assure you that we are well ahead of that game right now. And we are looking and talking to some folks that have a focus and understand the Palo Alto way. We've gone into the full details with those individuals just in case if something does happen.
Great. And you just mentioned succession planning, which is very definitely something that we have to have on our horizon. I think it was Sandra who recently shared with the council a slightly different description of it that really resonated, was career advancement and continuity planning. And I went, wow, that is much better. It's more descriptive and doesn't sound like we're wanting to see anybody leave. So
Yes.
anyway, just thought I'd share that. All right. Any follow-ups from anyone? Vicky?
Yeah, just really briefly, because I like the way Pat described the climate focus. Love the way Ed mentioned seeing around corners. And Dean, I just loved it when you said, yeah, electrification, that's fine, but what's next? I mean, we are the envy of many on the state of our electrification plan. So I love that even that is something that we need to look beyond. But what I wanted to just note quickly for Terry is that I think what can attract someone with many, if not all of these attributes we want is that we really do enjoy a strong reputation in the utilities world. I mean, it was clear to me when I went to the NCPA commission meetings and conferences that you put up slides about what we're doing on our grid mod and people just have their mouths hanging open. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't push for more and strive to do it, stronger, better, faster, but I think that would help attract candidates of the caliber we want. And we really enjoy strong support from our residents, from the advocate community who believe in these goals, want to help with these goals, and support the efforts that the city makes. So I think those two things hopefully would help attract the type of candidates we want.
One other thing.
Yeah, Ed.
Yeah, I also just want to point out to Terry that the process here is really important. It's the city manager's hire, but council members have said in conversation, in public, et cetera, that this is a big deal kind of hire. So we don't want to get in the way, but it's real important. So we need some touch points in the process here for you and Ed and others to work out. Because it's just so crucial for maybe decades. That's it. Thanks.
So, Chair, if I might add a couple things. One, we are planning to go to the Utilities Advisory Commission to have the same conversation with them. The date is still to be rescheduled, I do believe it'll be either this month or next month. The other thing I wanted to just perhaps ask Sandra and Terry to provide both for the public as well as for you as committee members is a bit of a lay of the land of the utilities market for executives. We did notice on the title of this, things like compensation, as one of the areas that we may want to discuss and get your feedback on. So if it's at the chair's pleasure, maybe Sandra and Terry can talk and shed a little bit of light on that. Just, I think you all astutely pointed out, we won't find all of these qualifications. These are some of the ones we want to highlight. And I think they might, now hearing your feedback, be able to have some dialogue with you.
Great.
Thanks, Kylie. As you're aware, I mean, this is a very competitive industry and market, because not only do we compete with public agencies, such as our local agencies, Santa Clara, Alameda, but we also have Roseville, and then private sector, right? So we all know that this is will be a challenge, and will also be a challenge when it comes to compensation. We've experienced this before during the last recruitment as well. As you know, Council, we've been working closely with you in finding a strategy, philosophy to attract and retain our employees and talent. And as a result, I do believe we're not so bad off, but we are reviewing it to be sure that we are out there with a competitive salary. Terry's helping us in that regard. Just in a, initial review, we could potentially anticipate a need for a 5 to 10% salary request that we would come to you and to the full council, of course. Terry, would you like to add to that?
Thank you, Sandra. I'll just echo Sandra's comments and stress that it's always been competitive, and it's always been difficult for public sector utilities to compete with private sector. But we're at a juncture that we've never been in before, with the salaries increasing at a pretty rapid pace, along with the retirements. Dean is not the only one retiring. So over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of turnover, a lot of opportunities. So, I think we're looking, at least close to the 400 mark in terms of $400,000 in terms of base salary, like right under, right above, somewhere in there. That's kind of what we're seeing in the initial data that we're taking a really deep dive on. So, and that's just being competitive in the public sector. The private sector, we can't even talk, really, because we're talking packages that are healthy seven figures. But as you all have indicated in different ways, there's no other opportunity like this. Like, if somebody really wants to make a difference in their career, in a community, on the planet, there's just nothing else like it. So it's historic, it's transformational. There's just so many things about it that we're going to focus on that are, all true, but it will be very compelling to the right person. Yes, we always have the cost of living challenges, the housing issues, that goes without saying. But if someone really wants to come do good, be a pioneer in the industry, not just to make a name for themselves or maybe a bigger name for themselves, but to really, match the caliber of accomplishments, the vision and the talent that's in this organization and in this community. We're looking for a unicorn. That's what you described as a unicorn. And just circling that back to compensation, the expectation is it's going to be an almost unicorn's salary. So we're still looking for the unicorn. We're not going to compromise on that. But, as you all indicated, it's going to be a challenge, balanced by the fact that it's just an incredible professional opportunity to not only bring the professional rewards, but I mean, it can be really personally fulfilling beyond belief for the right individual.
And Terry, acknowledging our cost of living, particularly from housing costs, nevertheless, do you see the candidate pool being outside of the state? Because as you mentioned, in public utilities, it's a limited pool. Are you thinking beyond California?
Thank you for the question, Chair Burt. Yes, absolutely. It will be a nationwide recruitment. We don't want to put geographic boundaries on potential rock star talent. And yes, because the candidate pool is limited, but we also want to be inclusive and want to be open-minded about the individuals we can attract. So yes.
Great, thank you. Vicky?
Yeah, I just, on the subject of compensation, you know, there's strong reasons we want our city manager living within our borders. And I wonder if, while we can't perhaps go as far as we do in that position, if there are pieces of a compensation package, it could be incentives, housing assistance of any sort that might help, because during an emergency, it would be nice to have our utilities director within our borders or at least nearby. So thinking creatively about that would be interesting.
All right, I think that completes our comment. Kylie?
I think so. And I just, to draw on that creativity, I think is helpful, as well as setting that expectation in terms of availability. I think I've kind of, and I just want to gut check with this committee. I'm hearing a general acknowledgement that we'll likely need to adjust the compensation for this position to attract the kind of candidate pool that we're looking at. I know we're not necessarily taking action, but if that's generally the consensus of the committee, you know, a salary schedule adjustment is something that we can bring to council on consent with the backup information, obviously, on the why we would be bringing that. Would that be something that this committee would be in support of, just so we can keep things rolling?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, as I said, we can't shoot too high here, and
Fair enough.
the good brands cost a little bit more.
Wonderful. That consensus and general feedback is super helpful for us and the HR team to keep this moving, while also recognizing the marketplace and your own calendars as we move through the end of the year. Thank you all for your conversation. Really appreciate the feedback. Thank you, Terry.
Thank you.
Thank you, council members.
Thanks, Dean.
Have a nice day.
Thanks, Dean.
All right, that moves us on to our item AA1. Strange numbering, but it's the overview of the University Avenue, California Avenue, and RPP parking fund financial status. Pricing policy options development and general fund loads. It's not a project under CEQA. So, Philip, looks like you're the lead here.
Yeah, I'll start us off. Thank you. And good afternoon, members of the Finance Committee. I'm Philip Cami, Chief Transportation Official. Today, I'm joined by Joseph Shin, our Senior Management Analyst, and Nathan Baird, our Transportation Planning Manager. And I also want to provide thanks to Lauren Lai and her ASD staff, and also Public Works staff that's not here with us today, but they also contributed to this staff report. Today, we're going to be providing an update on our current status of our parking funds, including the challenges that we face and potential solutions and next steps. Next slide, please. I'm just going to start with an overview of what we'll cover today. This update will summarize our current and projected revenues and expenses as we explore pricing, new permits, and potential policy changes to improve the financial health of the parking funds. And then next steps. And then with that, I'm going to pass the presentation over to Joseph, and he's going to cover revenues.
Hello, Joseph Shin, Senior Analyst for the Office of Transportation. Here we see kind of a revenue comparison between pre and post pandemic figures, excuse me. we do see the University Avenue parking revenues about 30% lower than in 2019. And then California Avenue, we see about a 50% decrease. Obviously sales in both long-term and daily permits are much lower than pre-pandemic levels. We have seen a modest gain in long-term permit revenues from fiscal year 23 to 24. And really the only healthy growth we've been seeing is, probably Dean's doing is that electric vehicle charging revenues show very healthy growth at greater than 25%. Next slide, please. Here we see a breakdown of the revenues in the University Avenue Fund. The solid bar chart or solid lines on the chart show our actuals for fiscal year 23, as well as fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25 adopted numbers. The dotted lines on the chart show the projections that we have currently through the end of the forecast through fiscal year 29. In terms of what we kind of see here potentially is just kind of a reflection of kind of a longer term trend in terms of, hybrid work schedules and office vacancies kind of causing our employee parking permits, which was kind of the bread and butter of, what we used to sell to generate the significant revenues in these funds. And next slide, we could see that on the California Avenue side.
Sorry, before we go further on these last two slides, do we have slides that show the pre-COVID revenue level? Because that's a lot of what we're discussing in the context.
Slide 3.
Yeah, I believe that was sorry. That was on the previous slide. Showed the overall
Slide
the
3.
2019 dollars.
Okay, I see in that table. Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Can we go back to slide, I think 5, please? And so this is just California Avenue. Just anecdotally, electric vehicle charging revenues are projected to be much, much higher than actual daily permit sales in California Avenue. Next slide, please. We're going to go into the expense summary now, and primarily the expenses in these funds are going to be driven by salaries and benefits as well as maintenance. We have seen significant cost escalations due to general inflation as maintenance contracts are being renewed as they expire. Also, we've seen on the demand side, as business activity kind of normalizes from post-pandemic levels, we have seen the increase in need for maintenance to ensure that we have high quality parking facilities that are well maintained. In the University Avenue Fund, staff has already done some cost saving strategies to reduce budgeted expenditures, such as we do not have valet programs anymore. We have shifted some funding from the TMA out of the University Avenue Fund, as you well know, which is now 50% funded by the general fund. Also some reductions in capital transfers to CIP projects. Again, staff has also been employing some flexible staffing and leveraging economies of scale in some of the maintenance contracts in order to ensure that we are being as cost effective as possible. Next slide, please. Here we're going to see the projected expenditures in a pie chart here, and just kind of to highlight here, 70% of the costs in the University Avenue Parking Fund are salaries and benefits as well as maintenance. And in the California Avenue Fund, we're seeing 75% of the cost in that way. Next slide, please. Here we're seeing kind of a graphical representation of the general fund support as well as the fund balance that we're currently providing to the parking funds. And we could kind of clearly see that's trending lower. So even with our subsidies that we are providing currently, the funds are still in essence drawing down on their fund balance. And eventually, we are projecting by fiscal year 30 that the University Avenue Fund will need more than the $700,000 budgeted annually in order to remain solvent.
All right. If you could just go back one slide, please. Okay, our current paid parking system does present some challenges. The color system can be confusing for visitors, and part-time workers often repark frequently. I'll never forget that we had a parking expert that came to Palo Alto and got a parking ticket. We have free and available parking all over in the garages and on street, and it either works for someone within the 2 or 3 hours of free parking, or it encourages them to move their cars every 2 or 3 hours. And the high demand spots fill up quickly, and coupled with the reparking, it causes congestion. Next slide. We're developing a new parking management concept that aims to improve parking efficiency and user experience and convenience through several key strategies. Dynamic pricing would adjust parking rates in real time based on demand and encouraging quicker turnover in premium parking areas. Flexible permit options would cater to the changing needs of workers and visitors with varying schedules, allowing easy time extensions when needed. Additionally, mobile payment integration would simplify the parking experience, allowing users to easily pay and extend time via a smartphone app, and also to leverage our automated parking guidance system, that's APGS on the screen, technology to find available parking locations. And then a merchant validation program would incentivize businesses to offer parking discounts, prioritizing spaces for customers while generating additional revenue for the city. And lastly, an improved parking program could complement the business improvement district to help fund improvements for the district. Next slide. And we're currently working on several pricing and new permit changes to improve revenues. We propose increasing permit prices by at least the general rate increase starting in FY 2026. We're working on new permit types such as half-day, quarterly, and long-term permits for 2 to 3 days per week to better meet the hybrid work schedules. However, we're currently upgrading our parking permit technology, which is necessary to actually achieve those new permits. So we have an RFP that's out right now, and we're currently in the process of selecting a new vendor that could actually deliver that to us. Although the strategies on this slide are important and we think are going to be important to our customers and what we're hearing, and will help us increase revenues a bit, we think they're unlikely to really help us address the deficit that much, especially in California Avenue, where there's more significant deficit. Next slide. Okay, so next steps. Our next steps include presenting the parking concepts that were back on slide 10, described earlier, the parking concepts that were described as under development, to the Planning and Transportation Commission in November, followed by City Council. And then in early 2025, we're going to conduct additional public engagement, including focus groups and public meetings to collect customer feedback, particularly on our new vendor, as we explore more permit options, curb management strategies, and on-street pricing. And then finally, during the FY 2026 budget process, staff will recommend evaluating the general fund support as a full or partial subsidy without an obligation for repayment. And thank you very much. That concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you. Do we have any members of the public who want to speak on this?
Yes, we currently have 4 members of the public. Our first speaker is Herb B.
Oh, now it lit. All right, I didn't know if it lit last time, all right? Okay, Chair Burton, committee members, I just have some comments on some small items, not on the whole thing dealing with the finances. The color zones were put in as a way to free up spaces of people who, for example, commuters who didn't want to buy a parking permit, but would, park in the street, and by having a time limit and cover a couple of blocks in the area, it would force them to move around. And also for that included the parking lots, but people did that, and may still do that by getting out of the office or wherever they are and move their cars. In terms of having retail establishments essentially pay for people's parking by getting in exchange for going to the retail establishment instead of the person paying for the parking. The retail establishment would. It is in the sense of you get free parking that nobody pays for it. In that situation, is essentially to attract the customers. And in terms of where that would take place, it seems to me that should be in the commercial area. I know in the case of the bus lanes in El Camino that you voted to move some of that commercial parking into the residential area. But I would think, say in downtown, that it should be just residential on the RPP program, that it would motivate commuters and customers to use what parking is available in the commercial area, although they're gonna have to pay for it. They may have to pay for it. And I think that would be helpful. From my own experience and also as you've been advised by consultants in the past, people will walk as much as a mile to avoid paying for parking. I know some people, come by, have a bicycle or a skateboard in the car and move, but those who have motorized ones are probably not going to be in their car anyway. If you extend the parking south of downtown all the way to Embarcadero, it's just residential parking. I don't think you'll find many commuters trying to find a free parking space on the other side of Embarcadero in order to come to the work downtown. Thank you. Oh, there is one other thing, and I know that this will completely different thing, and it will be opposed by mainly the businesses. But if we still have empty spaces in our garages, whatever we do, as I recall, the top two floors of.
Excuse me, sir. I'm sorry. Your time is up.
Okay, at another time.
Our next speaker is John S.
Good afternoon. This is John Shank with Thwaites. I've shared previously and feel strongly that attachments E, F, and G do not provide data worth anything. The report shows that there's significant available capacity in the city's garages at a moment in time in 2023. It's not important. We need far more accurate data to project the parking needs and the parking counts that we have being able to accommodate. Downtown offices are being reoccupied more and more each week. The downtown office spaces will continue to reoccupy as employers and landlords evolve the spaces to right size the needs of employers. The idea that employers have half capacity or something today is a reality, but that's going to decrease as they move to a smaller location, et cetera, in the future. We're not going to have this dislocation in the long run. Also, the parking fund's scope, the costs, has crept very far from its mission. Please take the time to analyze and have staff help analyze the items in this budget that shouldn't be there. The need for these loans and such isn't necessary if the district, specifically the downtown district, costs were aligned with its purpose. Please look into the amount of the salaries and the benefits that were referenced as big costs. for the purpose of the fund, which is to maintain and operate the garage, the downtown parking. It doesn't include streets team. It doesn't include other staff, police, twinkle lights, etc. Please get to the actual costs. Also, I think critically, the amount of time we have to comment on this, the fact that this staff report and everything was posted on Thursday or Friday before a 3-day weekend, and here today we have the hearing, your meeting. It's not enough time to engage the public. These matters are integral to all that's happening in many other committees regarding parklets, regarding what the retail committee is working on in terms of zoning and zoning maps and all of these things. We can't go one off on these things. They've got to be brought together. There needs to be opportunities for you to hear more completely from the public and for us to have discussions around these things. These 3-minute opportunities to discuss are deficient. Please, we all want to collaborate on this to come up with something that's going to work, but some of the basic information that's being used as a starting point is flawed, and it's going to lead to a bad spot. Thank you.
That concludes public comment.
Thank you. So before we get going on technical questions, I want to follow up on one of John Schenk's comments and concerns. What outreach have we had with property owners and businesses in the downtown area, and what feedback, if any, have we had to the proposals that you're considering?
I'll have to let Nate Baird speak to that, but I think that work is getting started. I know that there's been a survey, but I think that work, as described here, is getting started and will begin in early 2025. But I'll let Nate continue that. I also believe Steve Guagliardo is doing some outreach to the businesses.
I think where we've done the most work in regards to engagement is just the assessment of the current pain points. Even our previous parking planning efforts prior to COVID reiterated some of the many same pain points. And since then, we've really been kind of developing a larger planning framework in terms of beginning to use more data, as he was suggesting, but also just kind of thinking about parking as a planning tool, as a tool for mobility, rather than a simple provision or a simple, we previously set up the color zone for very specific reasons. We have a very specific employee program, but we are in a very different context now. And so the facts on the ground are very different, very changing. It's not as simple it was a complicated scenario before. It's now a changing dynamic scenario. So we're just kind of realizing that we do need more tools than we have now. And yes, there is definitely more engagement to be done, but we are working to bring on partners to kind of flesh out what those options will be and need to be.
Yeah, great. And I think because that kind of is key to some of the questions that John Schenk was asking and the question that you asked, because I think if you look at the action that's before you, this is really an update. This is really us telling you that we're going to be going out and we're going to be doing stakeholder engagement. We're going to be going to Planning and Transportation Commission. We're going to be starting this process. This is us starting the public conversation. This is us starting this process. This is really us providing an update to Finance Committee to let you know what's going on with the parking funds, where we're at, what general fund subsidy is going to be needed, what things we're looking at as potential concepts for improving the financial stability of the funds. Whether or not there are things that they're the desire to take on, that's a whole nother discussion and not something we have to tackle today. That's something we still want to have the public conversation with not only the businesses, but the residents as well.
Well, I think that's very helpful to clarify that this is the beginning of the process. I'll note that not only do we have a late packet on this, but the staff recommendations don't really align with what you just described. And this committee is being, as a recommendation that we receive information. And that's not really engaging with the committee to provide guidance and direction initially in terms of the process. And at a high level, what might be beginning a discussion on what are the real strategic goals that we now face. As Nathan had said, things have changed, and I'm not really seeing us start with what are the problems that we face today versus the problems we faced pre-COVID, and what do we anticipate will be on the horizon, even if they're different somewhat from what we have today. As John alluded to, and I was encouraged to hear that his outlook is that we are going to see a gradual return to office, and that there'll be a new equilibrium, even if we may have still a lot of office workers who only are in office 3 or 4 days a week. Somehow companies will figure out better utilization of their space, and over time we'll get a return, maybe not to where we were, but something different from where we've been and where we are. And so we want to aim the puck to where the player is going to be, not where he is at the moment, and that's always difficult. But I think that's a big part of the conversation we want to have. And I don't think you see that framed as really what we're being asked today. And frankly, it's going to take us maybe an iterative process to begin to absorb the information that you're presenting and think about what those strategies, well, first what the problem definitions are going forward, and then what are the goals and strategies that we would have as a result of that effort to define those problems. So Ed or Vicky? Ed?
Yeah, I'm struck by somewhat the same thing that Chair Burt just mentioned. So I just want to ask a couple quick questions, also not dissimilar from the last public comment. Well, sort of what's underneath these bar graphs? So you've got projections going out to 29. Have you intentionally raised some revenues between now and then in the modeling?
Yes, revenues have been increased by 5% for daily permit sales and long-term permit sales, as we kind of seen, although there's been an increase from fiscal year 23 to 24, there hasn't been a significant increase. I believe that increase is somewhere in the lower single digits. The only revenue that was really kind of forecasted much higher is electric vehicle revenues, as those are 15% increases during the projected forecast.
Yeah, and another question I had there is, are we exactly competitive on EV charges? With any other place that somebody could go and park and charge?
I don't have the information for that question.
Well, we need to get that information. Because if we're not, we should raise prices tomorrow. But if we are, that's a little bit different. The other question I had was that you talked about the maintenance contracts and the increasing salary and benefits. How much do you, if you know, how much of the salary and benefits that's plugged in here is outsourced to other folks as opposed to our own staffing?
For the public works maintenance contracts, or are you talking about?
Yeah.
Most of the maintenance in terms of like janitorial, street sweeping, power washing, that is done by outside contracts. The staff kind of run more of the operational aspect of the parking garages and lodges.
Yeah, because just says I don't know what's under here, which is another point that the public commenter just made. At some point we need to see what's under here, what percentage is being of the total expenses being.
And slide 7 kind of has a breakdown of those expenses, Chair Lowen.
Yeah, it's in a pie chart though.
Yeah, and
it's not in dollars.
Chair, on packet page 80, There's actually all the detail in perhaps grave detail, though, that kind of walks through the different categories. To your question of what is in-house staff versus contract.
Okay,
The in-house staff, if I'm just looking at the, what you're seeing on packet page 80 is going to be the revenues at the very top and then the expenses at the bottom. So the source and use of University Avenue as an example. And when you look at the expense side, you'll actually see that primarily the staff costs you'll find in the S salaries and benefits for ASD, transportation, and public works. And you'll also find staff costs in the enforcement PD. I would say the majority of the remaining costs are contractually provided services. So for example, maintenance and materials for CSD and public works, that's primarily contract services at this point.
okay. A couple of questions on your concepts under development. It's a quickie, but we say hourly pricing, shorten time limits in busy areas, but then have affordable extensions. Just want to clarify what you mean by that. That you can sit in the restaurant and add money to your.
Yeah, so the idea is, well, yeah, so right now we have a lot of 2 and 3 hour free parking everywhere in our garages, everywhere. So the idea is to limit that to have more like maybe 1 hour free, something like that. And then the idea is that we make it very easy. You have a mobile app and that you've got a mobile app and say you're running out of time, but you're still eating. You just can add more time easily. Maybe even you're in a store shopping and you go to the merchant and you say, hey, I'm shopping in your store. Can you extend the time for me? And they give you a code or something like that.
I was hoping that's what you meant. So I'm glad to have that confirmed. And then that's just to clarify the next one, merchant validation. So in this case, businesses would essentially pay the city for the parking as opposed to the customer would pay? Is somehow there's a structure to do that?
That would still need to be developed, but the idea is that there be some kind of symbiotic relationship that would, benefit both the business and, the parking. Okay.
And then with the major disruption of ECR, is that built into this modeling yet? I'm looking at your capable analyst there. We're losing all those parking spaces on El Camino, and we're going to build some other ones offsite. Do we just assume that's not part of this analysis yet?
I believe primarily the residential parking program, which is a little bit different than the downtown and Cal Ave parking programs, are mostly impacted from the ECR closure. So I don't think there is that much impact to these commercial district funds.
Well, I will say that we have recommended that some of the businesses that are impacted on El Camino Real, that they should, if possible, look to get a Cal Ave garage permit, which is cheaper than an RPP employee permit. So, when they're within walking distance to a Cal Avenue garage, we have a lot of capacity there. That the Cal Ave, as you saw, we're at about 50% revenue. We're less than 50% of our permits sold in our garages and lots there. So we have a lot of capacity. Some of those businesses on El Camino Real that have lost their parking are pretty close to some of those garages and lots in the Cal Ave district. So yeah, there is some coordination between these items for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. First, I might just comment on the EV charger issue that you brought up. We like to have affordable EV charging available so that people drive EVs into our city as part of our SCAP goals. But because, as Chair Bird often points out, our rates are lower than those around us, our electric rates, there will be people who want to drive their EVs here to charge them more cheaply. So if we can do something in between our rates and the next door neighbor's rates, we still want to have them drive EVs to our city, but we might be able to make a little money depending on the economics there. Just, yeah, I'm not clear why it's an action item because I think it's more informational and feedback item is what it appears. So I'll just give you some feedback and we'll go that route for now. But I was glad to see the current paid parking pain points itemized because I think those are accurate. There's one more that I've mentioned a couple times to privately to staff, and that is if you look at the not slide 9 when where they're enumerated, but the next slide with the photo of the parking garage and the little indicator up there with the little green lights that are supposed to show empty parking spots. I find that those, at least on the Sherman Ave, near Cal Ave garage, do not work well. So that is actually a point of aggravation. You say, I think there's a bunch of spots you drive down and they're all full. So can we get that fixed?
Yeah, Public Works is currently fixing those.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. I've complained a few times, so I'll be anxious for the day I can stop.
Yeah, just to note, that was an issue because they were getting hit by vehicles that were too tall.
Okay. Well, I think they're more frustrating when they're there and they don't work than when they're not there. So it would be good to have them be in working order. Okay. So these concepts under development. Yes, the mobile payments, I've used those in lots of other cities. I think that that's something very nice that we need to do, and to have it to be as smart as possible is obviously the goal. People are used to that now and in other for other applications, so that would be helpful. I'm a little nervous about the dynamic pricing, the rates based on demand. You know, it's irritating when you call an Uber or a Lyft and it's twice what you thought it was because now it's a rush hour. I get it, but I think that doesn't tend to make folks super happy. So I'd be very curious what the feedback as you start down this path of exploring concepts with various stakeholders to see how that one turns out. I also had some comments and questions about the merchant validation. There's some of them have been answered in this conversation so far, but let me just explore a little more. Are you intending that primarily for like downtown and Cal Ave, where it seems like there's a higher concentration of merchants for which it would make sense?
Yeah. Sorry, that's where we have the parking garages and lots and commercial parking.
Okay, and
I guess potentially other commercial areas if we were to add commercial paid parking, but just to step back a little bit, I think the way we're envisioning a pilot is potentially a paid parking pilot in like a high usage garage, or maybe a couple high usage garages at first. Like maybe right now we have free parking in our garages. It's really hard for us to say we're charging for parking in our garages and lots and have free parking also in our garages and lots and on our streets and everywhere.
You might want to say that again. I think you may have misspoken. Could you say, go ahead. So it's hard to say that there's free parking in our garages.
It's hard for us to charge for parking in our garages and lots when we have free parking in our garages and lots.
You mean that it's hard to charge some places when other places in our garages and lots?
I'm saying in this lot right below us, it's hard for us to have free parking and paid parking because somebody that's not here all day can choose, right? If they're only here for.
You mean it's hard because we have some spots that are free and some.
It's hard for us to get collect revenue when we have free parking in all of our garages. So the idea is that we would pilot paid parking in our most popular garages, maybe two of our most popular garages, maybe not City Hall, but two popular garages, and see what happens if we charge beyond 1 hour. See what happens. That doesn't mean charging on every parking space throughout Palo Alto on University Avenue, every single street. It means pilot it in two garages and see what happens if beyond 1 hour people have to pay for parking.
I think people will park in other places first, so.
Potentially, but right now those are really high usage garages. And
Right.
maybe that's when we have to expand, but that's how a pilot works.
Okay, well, I wasn't clear on where all you were proposing. I thought perhaps it was street and garages. It could be.
And that's possible. So that's why we're going to go through this stakeholder process and talk to Planning and Transportation Commission and talk to council.
Okay, that's great. Just trying to understand what the concept that's being explored. And a little bit was asked, and it sounds like you're still evaluating this too, but I'm trying to sort out what the economics are between who pays for what. And I'm curious, I have a comment and a question. I'm curious what is often done in other communities where they have this kind of merchant validation. And I'm wondering if it can be deployed in a way that would help with our economic redevelopment efforts, because, you know, if you want to get something for your money, you stop in and buy a pack of gum or a pair of socks or, you know, the cup of coffee, and then you get validated. But while you're in there, you remember it's near Mother's Day and you pick up a scarf or it could turn into a positive thing, but obviously that's something you're yet to explore with our merchants and see what they think. But depending on the economics, it would be more or less attractive both to the residents and to the business community. So can you tell us a little bit about how it has succeeded in other places?
Yeah, well, that's the general idea, is that it's mutually beneficial. That's the idea. So I like one that comes offhand. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but Bay Street in Emeryville, there's a shopping center, there's a parking structure. You pay for parking there. If you go into the Barnes and Noble, buy something, you get your ticket validated. They've got a purchase, you get your parking paid for. It's you're both getting a benefit. You're getting your parking, you're getting a discount on your parking, and they're getting a sale.
Yeah.
So it's
So
that kind of.
The town I grew up in had that, for
Yeah.
example. And so that's what we would do. We would stop into the different merchants and get something validated. But what I was trying to understand is the back end economics. When a merchant validates, then do they send us a share of like per validation or per the value of what was purchased, or how does that often work?
That is something I'm not sure about. Nate, do you have any details on that yet? I think that's something we're still looking into.
Okay, because if I buy a couch or a pack of gum, it's very different for the merchant.
I think there are different models for that. I think it depends.
Okay.
So yeah, we'll have
That's
to
the kind of thing
research
that I
more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that you're going to go explore
Yes.
and float with the business community.
Yeah, so I know there's like the Bay Street example that I had. There's places like that have done it. There's entire cities that have done this for their downtown districts.
Mhm.
So we're going to be looking at different models and building based on that.
Yeah, and so the hope is that we reward people for patronizing our businesses. It just feels like a little perk to get free parking if it isn't otherwise available. So a lot of moving pieces here, but I appreciate the effort. Just wanted to quickly note that on the next slide where it talks about new permit types, I like the idea of half day. I really like the idea of the long-term for 2 to 3 days per week. Chair Burt had mentioned that we're heading towards some kind of new equilibrium to be defined, this sort of post-COVID, how much remote work, how much in office. And if we can tailor whatever this long-term, but for hybrid schedules is, I think that's a really interesting concept to explore. So, thank you.
Okay, just following up on first a couple of the questions and comments from my colleagues on the EV charging. My recollection is that we have one set of charging structures if they're privately owned, and it's much higher and market rate and in many cases exorbitant. And then on the city-owned EV charging, which we've been moving toward a great deal more, our charging rates are lower. They fully include our cost recovery, including maintenance of the equipment, is my recollection. And then, of course, the city into the general fund, when we sell electricity, instead of somebody buying gas in the gas station, we get a small share of that gas tax. We get 2 transfers to the general fund. We get what's related to the electric utility transfer, and we get our utility users tax. And so this is one of the things that I've been very interested in as part of our climate action ad hoc committee, and that is to look at the economics of transitioning from gasoline sales to us selling electricity for EV charging. But you had alluded to that the EV charging was providing income to our parking revenue. Is that because those vehicles are paying for the parking, or what? Where's the, outside of that electric utility transfer, where's the income from parking at EV charging stations?
I believe when you're paying that rate for charging per whatever kilowatt hour, the city does collect a portion of that, so that utility cost is factored, and there is some sort of margin for that. I would have to double check exactly what that funding mechanism is, but there is revenues that do post in the parking funds specifically for electric charging.
Well, that's interesting. That wasn't explained to us previously when we had discussion at the that way when at the climate committee. And I think that is important to understand. We've basically historically, as we and other cities have tried to promote EV charging in the early adoption period. Basically, that you weren't being charged to use that parking space if you were doing EV charging. You'd pay for the EV, but not for the parking space. And that was a deliberate incentive. As we're scaling EV charging and it becomes a norm that electric vehicle ownership, I'll just add, I've known people who would park in the EV parking space. They had EVs, but they weren't charging. And because it was a free parking space and they had an EV. And the rule was, and this was not just us, this has been a pattern in the whole EV industry, that people would occupy EV charging spots. Now their cities and jurisdictions are putting in rules that you must be charging if you're in there. But so that's a changing environment itself. I mean, Nathan talked about a lot of the dynamics. This is another one that is really fluid. But the future is predominantly electric vehicles, and many of them will charge at home where it's actually cheaper yet, but many will charge in our commercial spots. And especially as was mentioned that because we have lower electric rates than surrounding communities, the city-owned chargers are the lowest charging rate of any commercial EV chargers, is my understanding. So people who live in PG&E areas may choose to charge at work because it may actually be cheaper. That may be fine by us because we may still have a net revenue from general funds. But I haven't seen any economic modeling. I've been asking for a couple of years on this through the climate initiative. I realized that this is another place to ask for that. We need to get these two groups together, and it's kind of a new modeling. People haven't kind of thought through these different kind of fiscal impacts, but it's due because it's scaling, and we need to make sure we're making right decisions. Okay. On the slide number 5, it showed the projected permit funds in the adopted FY25 budget. If we can get that slide back, that the projection was much higher in long-term permits than we actually had, and much lower suddenly in EV charging fees. Does anybody know the explanation for that anomaly?
Yes. So in terms of when we're finally when numbers are reconciled at year end, generally there is a little bit of a lag time. So when we did these projections, or the adopted budget rather, we were looking at 1 through 8 months worth of data. And then when we did our projections later on, we had the full fiscal year in scope. So that is kind of the difference.
But why would we have assumed that we were going to have a 2/3 reduction in electric vehicle charging fees versus FY 24?
I think as you mentioned before, I don't think much emphasis was put on EV charging. And now when we looked at the numbers in fiscal year 23 and 24, again, prior to that, there was not much business activity due to the pandemic. So, in terms of was fiscal year 23 an anomaly, we weren't sure. But now that we see both numbers for fiscal year and 23 and 24, I think we confidently say that EV charging revenue is growing at a very healthy pace.
Okay, so you're saying that when we created the adopted budget, we didn't have the FY 24 numbers. We were looking at the FY 23 numbers, didn't know if they were anomalous. And so we guessed off by a lot.
Correct.
Okay, and we also were assuming that the long-term permits were going to recover a lot. So this goes back to the question I had at the outset. Even though on slide number 3 it is, we had the overall revenue from FY 2019. We don't have FY 20, which was, let me think through. Yeah, that's right. FY 2019 would be the last pre-COVID year. I am very interested in seeing that. That's the baseline we ought to be looking at to understand what might a full recovery or X% of a full recovery look like. But we don't have that baseline. We just have on the gross numbers, not any of these breakdowns that we see in slides 4 and 5. And that's important. Okay. So in a follow-up,
Can you clarify, are you wanting in the column for fiscal 2019 that revenue segmented similar to the bar chart? Or are you wanting fiscal, okay.
I'd like to see that out of the bar charts on slides 4 and 5, to see them have going back to FY 2019.
Right, okay.
And it actually, given just trying to understand the impact of COVID, it would be valuable to have those in between years, the most important being the 2019, but I think it'd be useful to have the in between years as well. Okay. Then on the dynamic pricing, when we look at the current occupancy rates, which, as John Schenk noted, we have the FY 23, or was it calendar year 23, or it was a month in 2023. It's now that I think about it, that are in one of the attachments. First, is there a reason that we don't have any 2024 occupancy numbers? We were doing annual, right?
Yes, the 2024 occupancy count is later this month.
Okay.
So we do it annually. It just hasn't happened yet this year.
Okay.
And also to note that we're going to be getting even more data moving forward, because that was a question that John Schenk did kind of ask, but we're going to be getting even more data moving forward because we'll have these APGS systems in some of our garages. So we'll actually be getting, in addition to the data that we're collecting manually, which is a manual, we'll also be getting APGS data in some of our garages.
Okay. So that occupancy goes into the question of dynamic pricing. And I actually have kind of two questions on it, not only temporal, but location-based dynamic pricing or variable pricing, I should say. So there's dynamic and variable. And so if we have low occupancy, does dynamic pricing really work very well? Do we have still times of day where we're approaching 100%? How do you charge people more if there's not adequate demand?
So what we find is we have certain locations that are more in demand than others. So the answer to your question is, in areas where there's low demand, you don't charge more. You don't. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you charge less, obviously, in those locations.
So my gut is that dynamic pricing is good in principle, but it has less appropriateness when we're in a low demand period, which overall I think we're still in. Okay, and then we were talking about Cal Ave. One of the problems on Cal Ave is that the new Sherman garage is grossly underoccupied, but the Cambridge garage is less so, and some of the surface lots less so. And so have we looked at, I think on Cal Ave, we're charging the same pricing regardless of the garage.
That's correct. And actually, in California Avenue, you don't buy a permit specific to a garage. You can park in, if you buy a permit, you can park in any garage or
Well,
lot.
I think that's something we may need to reconsider, because if we're trying to have capacity align with demand, then we may need to differentiate better, including what Ed was talking about on what's the impact of loss of El Camino parking. It's not going to be, it's not hundreds of spaces in that vicinity, but to the extent there's an impact, they're going to want to spill over into the Cambridge lot closest to El Camino, which is already highly occupied. And then we got a bunch of empty spaces. So we want to look at whether we can incentivize the actions that we're seeking through pricing structures. That may not always be the case, but certainly to look at it. One of the points that was raised, I think, was it was by Herb Borak, was when we set up the RPP programs, they were, how do we contend with demand for parking exceeding the entire downtown areas, both Cal Ave and University? There just wasn't capacity. And we did at the same time have a certain amount of vacancies in some of the structures. So we wanted to create an incentive system for people to use those structures, which reduced the overflow into the neighborhoods. But if we have surplus capacity, it begs the question on whether we ought to be selling permits in those neighborhoods. Not because we're any longer selling so many that it's having a real adverse quality of life impact, which was what was really the driver for the RPP programs, but because we are bleeding off a certain amount of demand for using our garages. I'm not sure what would be the right action there, but I think that's one of those strategic decisions that we should be rethinking. Our prior assumptions and drivers for creating the RPP programs have changed. And what should we do differently going forward? And I don't pretend that we have the answers today, but it does deserve a rethinking. And then you mentioned the new permit vendors or the RFP going out to the new permit vendor. One of the things that that same permit vendor, would that be the same vendor and system for the mobile payment, or would the mobile payment be a different vendor?
The RFP that we have out includes for mobile payment. So it includes the option for a mobile payment and also to connect to our APGS systems.
And do we know, is that now becoming the norm that vendors that are providing the mobile payment provide this range of capabilities?
It's highly selective. So we put out our requirements. We know so far that 30 or so firms looked at them, but we got 3 good bids. So we know that we're asking for a lot of capability in our next vendor.
Oh, and so those 3 offer both things, kind of the
So
mobile.
we've required our vendors to put forward proposals for what we're looking to do.
So we got 3 that gave us everything we're looking for.
So we're looking for vendors that have the capabilities that we need to provide more options than we are able to right now.
Great. And on the question Vicky was asking about on, where the revenue, who pays for what when you have validation, I think that's extremely important. I was surprised we didn't have a good sense of that today. Because when we say, oh yeah, everybody wins, not necessarily. It depends on how that's structured. And And I assume other places have figured it out, so I'm looking forward to learning that, but it's not a given under every circumstance. It could be that the merchants do all the winning and we lose revenue. And we may say, that's so important that we're willing to do that. But it may be some other balance. And then kind of from a process going forward, I'm really interested in how council committees can participate in a more informal workshop discussion with some of the other stakeholders. And those can include both property owners, merchants, neighborhood residential neighborhood leaders. And so that we get to have a real discussion and discourse on the pros and cons. And this also ties in very much with the retail committee, and I'm wondering whether that might be the forum for that, or maybe it's outside of that. But want to make sure that we're really thinking about how we do that.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. And I think you're really hitting on, and I think, hear the committee loud and clear. We could have teed this up perhaps in a little bit more clear fashion, though I think where you've got in your discussion is exactly what staff was looking for. This is really that kind of initial study session type discussion as we now will embark on these next steps. Obviously not wanting to get ahead of the council, but also not having all the answers quite yet. I think your first stab or kind of shot at trying that conversation is going to be at retail in November. So actually at retail committee tomorrow, you're going to talk about kind of our options, fit and form for that kind of forum with property owners actually and their engagement. Obviously, we've got some rules and regulations surrounding Brown Act and how we can host these kinds of dialogues. So we'll navigate that tomorrow as we talk about how to have these kind of engaging conversations with the anticipation that in November we'll try with our property owners where we, topics could include, obviously, parking as a key area of interest, as well as our other economic development work.
It strikes me that in our procedures and protocols, we don't have a procedure for what, to my recollection, study sessions of committees. And, study sessions at the council are less formal and less rigid. And it seems that at committees, they could be even less formal and more workshop oriented. We haven't set that up, but why don't we think about that? I don't know that it's prohibited under our current procedures and protocols. It's just not enabled.
Right. And I think there's your internal kind of the guidelines, the council policies and procedures, and then there are going to be some Brown Act regulations that we have to manage within, but totally hear you loud and clear on how to have those study session type environments. You're actually identifying why this is listed as an action item, because on committees, we don't have study sessions. So even if it's an information item, it's still listed as action on our committee agendas. And like I said, we can do a better job of teeing those up in a clearer fashion.
Yeah, I'm not envisioning what the Brown Act issues might be, but we can have follow-up discussion on that. Okay.
Tomorrow.
I think that covers all of mine. This was, any follow-ups? All right. Thank you very much.